Good evening. How are you? Well, the temperature is 90 degrees according to Thomas Jefferson, and the wind is a couple miles an hour, and the humidity is down from 70 to 30%. So it's a very different kind of feel, and it's good to be outside. Treadmills are not that exciting. Whatever you use with music and videos and stuff like that, or cogitate on things, it's not the same as when you walk on a dirt road or any place outside. So, what's the business? The business is still the top story, and in fact, I was doing some writing today in my cases, and I had the talking heads for the Sunday shows on in the background, and since I wasn't paying full attention, I can't be sure, but I'd estimate 89.3% of everything they were talking about was how they forced Biden not to run. Now, this is a strange deal here, because he's not incapacitated. He's old. He showed his age plainly one evening. Whoever he is today, a lot of these people who are now critical of him have seen him for, well, recent years, okay, when supposedly he'd be showing his age more. Now, but here's the other thing. While these people have been sitting there thinking about Biden's age, and that no one wants Biden or Trump, so they say, double haters, the party had set up these primaries, and Biden was in those primaries. Biden won those primaries. There is no device in the rules of these elections to overturn those delegate votes. Between now and the convention in August, the convention would have to probably give him on the first vote. I haven't looked at the rules this year, but delegates usually have to vote on the first ballot for whom they were dedicated to, and then depending on second or third ballots, they start having more freedom as to who they can support. So, in a country that claims to believe in the vote, the franchise, all sorts of people are suggesting all sorts of alternate remedies to replace Joe Biden. The ageism in America is a bad setting for the lack of courage by people who invoke that great comic Mel Brooks statement, we got to protect our phony baloney jobs. That is, a lot of people are up for office, and they're wondering, because nobody knows, how will whatever happens in the presidential race affect them. Now, I know something about this, because when I ran for Congress in 1984, I won a primary and I had a chance in the general election, but it drifted away. A multitude of my personal and political disabilities were not in play because Mondale, who was at the top of the ticket, had said at the Democratic convention, Ronald Reagan will raise your taxes, so will I, and I've just told you that. So the problem with that statement, or at least it was believed to be the problem, was that it meant he carried, I think, D.C. and Minnesota. And and I watched the separation between myself and the incumbent spread. So I know what it means to have a strong president at the top of the ticket, or a presidential candidate. But I don't know that anyone else can do better than Joe. Nobody does. They can tell you these things, but they don't know. And the appearances since the great debate, when Biden, by his own admission, says he performed poorly, is that he appears to be a man of his age who knows what's going on and talks plainly. So, he mumbles his words. Does he hesitate so long that you're concerned? when I was a young prosecutor once, the judge had limited what questions I could ask in a organized crime drug case. And I stood for, I don't know, maybe 20 seconds thinking about how I could frame the question to get around the judge's legitimate objections to what he saw was the question I asked. And the defense counsel, and there were at least 3 of them, they thought this was hilarious that I was taking this time, like there's something wrong with me. But then I found the question and I asked it. It was answered in such a way that it turned the court against the defense counsel for perhaps messing with our witnesses' safety. So, now, is Biden different? Well, for one thing, I was, in my 20s, I guess, late 20s. And Biden is 81 years old. And I'm a lot older now than I was then, too. So, and it's very funny that Maxine Waters said she's 85 and she has no trouble doing her job every day. She said I'm older than Joe Biden. Okay, so we have a number of things floating around, like I'm a delegate, I'm not, but say I'm a delegate from a state where we've had the contest to see who the nominee should be. And I voted for Joe Biden. Well, you're just going to overturn that and ignore that because you party elders know better than I? I thought we had that fight in the Democratic Party, and that we decided more democracy, more of a franchise, more of the people would help the process. So there's no way this happens, that is, that Biden is given the heave-ho without a lot of difficulty. And to date, as best I can tell in all public statements, our vice president, Ms. Harris, has stood by Joe Biden. And because she felt that she was used less, which is a fair problem for any vice president, she was given a more active role. And some people have mixed reactions to that. Well, they were not easy assignments. One of them had to do with the border. Another one, in which there's no question she made a difference, had to do with getting rid of Roe v. Wade, fighting for what differences, terrible challenges it meant for women. So let me recast a little bit where I see myself. Absent proof that Biden is not going to make it to the election, not going to make it to being sworn in, not make it for 4 years, though if it happens after the inauguration, I would trust that Vice President Harris could and would take over and do well. So that's my starting point. Now, I have this abiding concern of a process that looks like it was a heavy-handed deal by others just to have the power, if not the right according to the rules, to press and remove Biden as the apparent nominee of the Democratic Party running for reelection. I think that's a problem. And now the alternative, of course, is that we'll go with the vice president. Is that vice president going to choose, when she's president, a vice president herself? How are we going to work that? So how are we going to identify her vice president? She's going to choose that. Really? Anyone she wants? Is that going to be a fight? It's going to be a fight on the floor. It's going to be a fight among Democrats. Instead of fighting Trump, who has had his own faux pas, his own word salads, his own hesitations. And here's the other thing. Why is the media to the exclusion of whoever Trump is, whatever he is, whatever frailties he has, whatever bad acts he has, whether he's endorsing the 2025 document or not. Why are we only hearing about Biden? When has the New York Times said anybody should resign from office and not run for president? When? I don't think there's ever been a time. And we do have the lesson loud and clear, although there are plenty of differing circumstances, that when Johnson said, I'm not going to run, chose to do it, Humphrey couldn't make the grade to get elected himself over Nixon, and Nixon became our president. So by what series of steps can we go forward without Biden, make it credible, and honestly believe we can win the election? And one of the ideas is to have a mini primary, crowd a stage with a bunch of candidates. I don't know, maybe the Boy Scouts will host it, and have all these people talk, including Biden. So Biden, who's won, would be on that stage? No, that's not right. Would Biden be excluded from that stage? No, that's not right. He has a better claim than anybody else who's going to be on that stage, except perhaps the vice president. So, are we thinking about the unintended consequences of our desperation to cover our own hefty behinds? And to do so, we believe in our fear that this is the only way to secure our own positions in the party. You know, it has less weight when somebody is running for the U.S. Senate in California, say, what their opinion is. It says something for members of Congress to comment on who they'd like to choose as the president, and we may be saving them from some pretty terrible situations. Because if history's any guide, replacing the president with someone else at this late hour can mean the ticket will do terrible and compromise a person even more who is down the pecking order in the lower offices in the different states. So, what are we going to do? Well, it's obvious from my remarks. We stand by Biden. We help and support him every way we can. We argue that it's good to have a sensible candidate who's accomplished what he has and should accomplish more. And this is not a beauty contest. Neither man at their age would think of themselves as beautiful, but both struggle in their own way to be observed. Frankly, it sounds to me like Biden has done everything he can in terms of managing his health to be here today, to be our president, to keep the unbelievable hours that when he served, the President Obama joked about how he had aged. But you see, that's a different story. And you may notice he joked about it more as he left office and in his second term. So, that's number one. There are a bunch of other stories that are interesting, but there's one that I want to single out involving Abby Lowell. Abby Lowell is the trial lawyer for Senator Menendez from New Jersey, who's being tried in New York on an alleged bribery, fraud, corruption case in which he allegedly received gold bars, a car, cold hard cash. Some of it was found in a closet and found in his coat. His defense, I think I can fairly state, is that the equivalent, I didn't know the gun was loaded, but in this case that means I didn't know what my wife knew or what she was doing. And it was all up to her, and so I didn't commit an offense. And as a result, his trial has been separated from hers. Abby Lowell, who handled Menendez's earlier case, in which he had a hung jury, and the federal government decided not to prosecute him after that. So this is another run at Menendez. I think the last one was tried in New Jersey. This one's being tried in New York. In the final days before Menendez was indicted, his lawyer, Abby Lowell, put together a presentation, a PowerPoint, to show the office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, Southern District of New York, where I was once an assistant myself, why they should not go forward against Menendez. And the prosecutors wouldn't tell them anything they had in mind. There was no take and give, no give and take. And they did indict after that. In the indictment, they claimed that there was an effort to obstruct justice by Menendez using his lawyer. In other words, his lawyer came in and made a presentation. They claimed it was factually flawed. They claimed that Abby Lowell, didn't know that it was therefore his client who was saying it, and his client was giving things to his lawyer that was untrue. Wow. And it sounds like the judge is prepared to let this evidence in. Now, I don't know what Menendez did, obviously, although I've seen some of the stories that say this is certainly not a frivolous prosecution and there are great difficulties for the defense. But it sounds a little desperate to take the lawyer who's on trial and say he didn't do anything wrong, he didn't know, his client gave him information that was false, that he then put in a PowerPoint and tried to persuade us in the days just before the indictment not to do it. So they claim that that information came from Menendez. What an impossible situation Abby's in at a trial in which he is going to be cited as the conduit for a false statement from his client that was an obstruction of justice. How do you argue against that? You certainly don't go in and say, I didn't know the gun was loaded, I didn't know the statement was false. And maybe it wasn't false. And one of the things you probably do put on is how it was true. But the lawyer who is sitting in the courtroom shouldn't be put in that position. In other words, another lawyer probably should do it, or the evidence shouldn't be put before the jury. So why talk about this? Because it's interesting how the government leans with alacrity in certain cases. We're talking about Garland's Department of Justice and the Southern District of New York, my old office. And they took out all the stops to get Menendez, including this compromising act in their presentation. So are they trying to convict a Democrat so they can say, see, we're fair? Now, prosecutors make decisions like that, and this feels a lot like that they don't want to lose this under any circumstances, and so their grasp exceeds their legitimate reach. That's the way it feels to me. So, there's lots going on. There's more we could talk about. If you get the Times, you should take out the sections that show the most important decisions of the Supreme Court and who voted what. And there are short little summaries. And if you like to follow the thrust of the court, that is in the wrong direction, this is a good thing to, well, glance at if you're not, as I am, a somewhat obsessive lawyer about what's going on in the law. That's what I'm supposed to do. Continuing legal education, they call it. I give lectures, I take lectures, and I practice law. That's how I hope I know what I'm doing. So, it's good to be out, as warm as it is, and I hope tomorrow, after I get back from court during the day or in the evening, I'll get a chance while the sun's still out to go for another walk. So all the best. This is what I have to offer from my cathedral of trees in Northern Virginia. All the best. Bye-bye.